From Pacifica, this is Democracy Now! Leftist presidential candidate Mauricio Funes has won the presidential election in El Salvador, ending 2 decades of conservative rule. We'll go to El Salvador to speak with journalist Roberto Lovato. He interviewed the president-elect last night. Then a U.S. activist from Oakland is critically injured when Israeli soldiers fire a tear gas canister at his head during a nonviolent protest against the separation wall in the West Bank village of Ne'alin.
The impact caused several condensed fractures to his skull and collapsation of his eye socket.
And today marks the 6th anniversary of the killing of American peace activist Rachel Corrie. She was crushed to death by an Israeli military bulldozer in Rafah. Democracy Now! Producer Anjali Kamet accompanied Rachel's parents, Cindy and Craig Corrie, back to the area of Rachel's death. All that and more coming up. Welcome to Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. The failed insurance giant AIG is preparing to pay out $450 million in bonuses to top executives and other employees, despite receiving a $173 billion government bailout. The bonuses include over $165 million to executives in the financial products unit, which lost $40 billion last year and played a major role in the meltdown of the global financial system. AIG is paying out the bonuses even though it's now 80% owned by the U.S. government. On Sunday, Lawrence Summers, the chief director of the White House National Economic Council, described the bonuses as outrageous, but said the bonuses are part of a contract.
We are a country of law. There are contracts. The government cannot just abrogate contracts. Every legal step possible to limit those bonuses is being taken by Secretary Geithner and by the Federal Reserve System.
AIG's new chief executive, Edward Liddy, justified the bonuses, saying AIG would have trouble attracting and retaining talent, quote, if employees believe their compensation subject to continued and arbitrary adjustment by the U.S. Treasury. Meanwhile, AIG has disclosed for the first time the names of the financial institutions that benefited from the government's $173 billion bailout of AIG. Goldman Sachs was the largest recipient at nearly $13 billion. Over $35 billion was also paid out to foreign banks, including Société Générale of France, Deutsche Bank of Germany, Barclays of Britain, and UBS of Switzerland. In El Salvador, the leftist presidential candidate Mauricio Funes has claimed victory, ending 20 years of conservative rule. Funes's party, the FMLN, is a former guerrilla group that fought El Salvador's U.S.-backed military government for more than 20 years. Funes defeated Rodrigo Villa of the Arena Party by 3 percentage points. During a victory speech, Funes promised safe change in the mold of Brazil's president, Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva.
That is why I invite, from this moment on, different social and political forces to help us build this unity, which should be based on tolerance, on respecting differences, and the identification of common objectives.
Okay. We'll have more on El Salvador after headlines. In an attempt to defuse a growing political crisis, the Pakistani government's announced the reinstatement of Iftikhar Chowdhury, the deposed Chief Justice. The move comes as Pakistan was facing massive street protests against the rule of the president, Asif Ali Zardari, the widower of Benazir Bhutto. On Friday, Zardari ordered Pakistan's main opposition leader, former Prime Minister Nawaz Sharif, to be placed under house arrest. Sharif defied the order, held a large protest in Lahore Sunday. Sharif was threatening to march to Islamabad, but the protest was called off after the government announced the reinstatement of Chowdhury. Chowdhury and 60 other judges were dismissed in 2007 by the former president, General Pervez Musharraf. An American activist from Oakland, California, was critically injured Friday when Israeli soldiers fired a tear gas canister directly at his head during a weekly nonviolent protest against the wall in the West Bank village of Ne'alin. 37-year-old Tristan Anderson is the fourth member of the International Solidarity Movement to be critically injured or killed by the Israeli military since 2003. This is Jonathan Pollack of the ISM.
He was shot directly with a tear gas projectile, with an extended range tear gas projectile from about 50 to 60 meters. And the impact caused several condensed fractures to his skull and collapsation of his eye socket. He was operated on in the hospital a few hours later in critical condition, and large portions of his frontal lobe had to be removed because it was spattered with bone fragments as a result of the impact of the tear gas canister.
During their weekly demonstrations since last April, 4 unarmed Alin residents have been killed and over 400 injured by the Israeli Defense Forces. We'll have more on this story later in the broadcast. The International Committee of the Red Cross concluded in a secret report 2 years ago that the Bush administration's treatment of prisoners constituted torture in violation of the Geneva Conventions. The findings were based on interviews with prisoners once held in the CIA's secret black sites. The Red Cross said the 14 prisoners held in the CIA prisoners gave remarkably uniform accounts of abuse that included beatings, sleep deprivation, extreme temperatures, and in some cases waterboarding. The author, Mark Danner, published parts of the secret Red Cross report in the New York Review of Books. Danner said the Red Cross's use of the word torture has important legal implications. Danner said, quote, "It could not be more important that the ICRC explicitly uses the words torture and cruel and degrading. The ICRC is the guardian of the Geneva Conventions, and when it uses those words, they have the force of law." Hours after excerpts of the Red Cross report were published, former Vice President Dick Cheney appeared on CNN. He was asked whether he believed President Obama was making Americans less safe by abandoning some of the Bush administration's counterterrorism techniques.
I think those programs were absolutely essential to the success we enjoyed of being able to collect the intelligence that led us defeat all further attempts to launch attacks against the United States since 9/11. I think that's a great success story. It was done legally. It was done in accordance with our constitutional practices and principles. President Obama campaigned against it all across the country, and now he's making some choices that, in my mind, will in fact raise the risk to the American people of another attack.
Dick Cheney's comments came days after the Obama administration said it'll no longer consider prisoners at Guantanamo to be enemy combatants. Despite abandoning the label, the administration claims it still has the right to indefinitely hold prisoners without charge, even if the individual is captured far from any battlefield and has not directly participated in hostilities. Attorneys for Bernard Madoff have filed an appeal to challenge a judge's decision to keep the former chairman of NASDAQ in jail until his sentencing in June. On Thursday, Madoff pleaded guilty to running the biggest Ponzi scheme in history, defrauding investors of $64 billion. He faces up to 150 years in prison. Meanwhile, newly released court documents show Madoff and his wife had a net worth of over $800 million at the end of last year. Their assets included homes in Manhattan, Palm Beach, and the French Riviera, a $7 million yacht, a $2 million fishing boat, and $2.6 million in jewelry. Madoff's wife is trying to keep nearly $70 million worth of assets, including a penthouse Manhattan apartment, claiming her money has nothing to do with her husband's scheme. In other economic news, Chinese Premier Wen Jiabao has publicly expressed concern about the security of China's trillion-dollar investment in U.S. government debt. Wen said, quote, "We have lent a huge amount of money to the U.S. Of course, we're concerned about the safety of our assets," he said. China is America's biggest foreign creditor. On Saturday, a European delegation met with Hamas leader Khaled Mashal in Damascus in the first announced visit of a European delegation to meet with Hamas leaders. Members of the delegation included British parliamentarian Claire Short.
We are very clear that to make progress, we need to talk to Hamas because they represent a big proportion of the Palestinian people. So we're trying by our visit to bring more and more parliamentarians to open up discussion with Hamas in order to move things forward in the hope that we can, in the end, get a just peace.